Well, good day and welcome back to the Secret Solve, a program where we look at the secret and try to figure out what Byron Price was up to when he created the book. So, today's episode is one of my favorites. One of my favorite episodes, the American Motor Gremlins, Infernalus Combustionus. The Combustionus Infernalus. Well, we're talking about exploding gas tanks here because in 1970, we that's what we had. We had the Ford Pinto, who ended up getting sued in California in a private lawsuit, and the entire Stana apparently did not like the Ford Pinto either. And so that's kind of what we're talking about. But let's get into the meat and potatoes. You may remember we talked about the guy, Ralph Nader, who wrote the book Unsafe at Any Speed, and we were introduced to him before. And now we're being introduced to uh, the, and that was about the Corvair and how it was unsafe. Okay, well, moving forward. So we're talking about an AMC Gremlin, and this was a car produced by the American Motors Corporation. They were assembled in Kenosha, Wisconsin, also in Brampton, Ontario, Canada. Uh, from 74 to 83, they moved the production to Mexico. Okay, so it was the first American built quote unquote import. In other words, it was a compact car. So we're trying to get the car smaller. 1973 got gasoline issues. The import cars are killing the U.S. manufacturers in Detroit, and they're fighting back with the Gremlin. Uh, this hatchback can sell for 1959, but you were going to have a special order if you wanted to get um, if you wanted to get the carpet in the thing. So it was designed by Dick Teague and a Nixon. I always like it when we find a Nixon, and so they rolled this thing out. It had the 1971 had an X, so maybe this is Joe X. You know, the X edition, the AMX, came out as the next project from these guys. And anyway, so the 5 mile per hour test in 1973, the NHTSA, which uh, uh, the NHTSA company or that rates the cars, basically said that they're not very safe. Okay, so the other thing is that you could order in your AMC Gremlin a Levi Strauss package that included an interior trim, which it had spun nylon upholstery made to look like the denim that you could get from Levi Strauss. Oh, there's so many things. So then you could talk about the Arab oil embargo that would also be fun. Okay, so let's talk about old Dickie Teague, Tricky Dick. So they have Dick, Teague, and Bob Nixon, right? So you have Richard Arthur Teague. So this article is basically to introduce you to the Arthur and the Arthurs. Remember the name Arthur, folks, because that is part of this story, Arthur. So we're getting into introducing you to Arthur and how Arthur could be important in this by introducing Richard Arthur Teague, and also the fact that he worked with a Bob Nixon. So you actually get Richard Nixon and Bob Teague. Anyway, uh, so Teague's mother worked in the motion picture industry during the silent film movie era. I like that because we've been there. At 5 years of age, Teague appeared in 5 episodes of Our Gang, playing the role of Dixie Duval, a girl. What? So his mother was in Our Gang, and Our Gang, well, you just have to know what Our Gang is. It basically uh, it's an American series of comedy short films chronicling a group of poor neighborhood children and their adventures. Uh, I think it has a guy by the name of Alpha in it. You just need to look that one up. I'm going to let you go. But here we have a Dixie. I like it when we run into a Dixie. When she was 6, when he was 6, he was seriously injured in a car accident near Pasadena, California. Well, maybe Dick Teague actually was playing a girl. Because this article, maybe he played the girl. Hell, I don't know. All right, so maybe this goes back to that guy that was wearing the slippers. I don't know. Life is a highway. Injured in a car accident near Pasadena, California, which was caused by a drunk driver. He lost several teeth, suffered a broken jaw, as well as sight in his right eye, leaving him without depth perception or what's called stereoscopic vision. His mother, unfortunately, was left as an invalid. In other words, she was paralyzed. A year later, his father was killed in another automobile accident, also caused by a drunk driver. I think Dick Teague is pretty important when we look at some of the themes that we've explored earlier in The Secret, and provides a lot of potential confirming information. So, if you follow along with my idea that the Patton museum solve is important, and that was an automobile accident that left Patton dead, paralyzed initially, and if you look at a shooting that occurred in Bath Beach, you'll find that somebody's eye was damaged by somebody who wasn't a drunk driver. But if you look at the image, there's a bullet hole in the fender's front fender panel. So there's obviously a bullet hole in this car for some reason. And we're not sure why the bullet hole is in the image, but it could be there for a number of reasons. So he was exempt from the Army or military service, and he graduated from Susan Miller Dorsey High School in 42. His boss was Paul Brown. So we found another Brown. And he worked as an aircraft technical illustrator for Northrop Corporation. And we've been introduced to Ralph Northrop through marriage. Northrop. We've been introduced to the Northrop Corporation through the marriage of one of the previous people we've talked about in The Secret. And we have Paul Brown as being... So Paul Brown had an influence in having him go into this study. So early, he worked with Kaiser Motors. Remember, we were introduced to the Kaiser car in the Teen Angel story. And in the Teen Angel story, the car that was featured was the Kaiser. And then I went on to tell you about Kaiser and Kaiser Shipyard and where Kaiser's metal plant was, and it was all in California. This guy's in California near Pasadena. The Jet Propulsion Lab is in California near Pasadena. So we've got some Pasadena here. In 1947, he joined General Motors Design Studios, headed by Edmund Anderson, another Edward, and Edwina. And he started apprenticeships and he graduated to the Cadillac Advanced Design Group. He also worked in the 50 Oldsmobile rocket. Well, the irony of this is that General George S. Patton was riding in a Cadillac designed car when he went through the windshield. In this article, it says that they drank the fluid from the window washer bottle. In 1947, and then he worked on the Oldsmobile rocket. Well, obviously, he's going to work on the rocket. He's Rocket Man. Oh, that's Elton John. Anyway, and so he then also worked for Harley Earl. And I guess I'm not going to look up Harley Earl because he's more of a GM guy, and this guy here is specifically tied to the AMC Gremlin. But if you like Harley Earl, you can go there. In 57, the entire Packard styling team had been moved to Chrysler Corporation. And so I guess he then goes to So he basically gets absorbed by Chrysler. Uh, and Teague was the chief stylist, but he did not get along with management, and he went to American Motors. And by this time, Edmund E. Anderson had moved his over to work for American Motors, so he was reunited with one of his former guys. And so Teague was vice president at the automaker from 64 until 83. So at his retirement, he joked that the only Detroit automobile company that he had not worked for was Ford. That's pretty funny. Okay, so although he worked within a tight budget restrictions, Teague sometimes referred to his times there as Camelot. Oh, Camelot. There's Camelot in the White House, if I remember right. Oh my. Okay. So they talk about some of the other cars that he designed, and eventually had a pretty long designing career, as noted by the time frame that I pointed out. So I think I'm about done with Dick Teague. So he was a noted automobile historian and collected classic cars and rare vehicles as well as other memorabilia. And so he had a fairly good store of cars when he stuff. There is, by the way, a very large museum, and the San Diego Automotive Museum is a very, very large automotive museum. Most of his cars ended up there. I don't know if he donated them before he died or after he died, or when he died, or don't know how they got them, but that's where his cars ended up. So Nixon is the lesser known party here, but I think the fact that they were able to put and get the little fun Nixon, Richard Nixon joke with these two pairings. That probably took a little bit of research to get to them. And the reason I say that is they could have just wrote this article about the Pinto, the Ford Pinto, because the Ford Pinto is more or less the exploding car. But before we get to exploding Pintos, let's start, or exploding beans, or Jack the giant climate at Beanstalk. Let's talk about STP, otherwise known as this oil treatment that was named scientifically treated petroleum. So this started out as a chemical compound in 1953 by Charles Dwight Liggett, Jim Hill, and Robert DeHart. And they made this in St. Joseph, Missouri, a single product company. And they founded this company in 53, but by 61, they had sold it to the Studebaker Packard Corporation. And they started advertising it as a Studebaker tested product instead of the original specifically treated petroleum. The STP logo and brand was, widely recognizable, and a lot of people got into using it. So by the time in 1969, it was acquired by S-Mark, which may get you to Swift and Swift Holdings. And I think we talked about the JBS Swift company before when we talked about Armor and the stockyards and all of that. But we'll revisit that because this is who actually owned STP in 1976 to 84 when the book was written. So let's talk about JBS USA. So JBS is this big holding company that came out of the Swift company, which when 16-year-old Gustavus Franklin Swift founded a butchering operation in Massachusetts. Its origins on Cape Cod, later to locations in Brighton and Albany and Buffalo, New York. The Swift and Armor Company acquired 2/3 controlling interest in the Fort Worth stockyards by 1902. So that's the Dallas-Fort Worth area. The actual company, JBS Swift, was incorporated in Chicago. I talked about them a little bit more, but anyway, by the 20s, Swift and Company operated their largest and most modern meat processing plant in St. Paul, Minnesota. So I guess I've talked about this before. Well, there's some more S Mark stuff. The S Mark left the petroleum business, selling in 1980, selling the Vickers Petroleum to Mobil. So they actually owned Vickers Petroleum, and Vickers was started by Jack Vickers, who started a refinery in Potland, Kansas. Um, and so I guess they were also in the fuel. So there's a little connection. And oh, by the way, the Vickers logo looks a little bit like the swept wing design of the they look like the Kaiser image with the wings up. anyway, anyway, Vickers, they weren't that very big of a company, but they were in basically Hayesville, Wichita, Kansas headquarters. All right, so that's the fun with Vickers. Uh, so, all right, that covers that. Studebaker was basically a company in South Bend, Indiana, and it was acquired by the Packard Motor Company in Detroit. So, Indiana, you go from Indiana to Detroit when you follow the Studebaker Packard thing. So, the Ford Pinto. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the cars that made the 1970s the shittiest point in automobile history. And the number one suspect on the list of this is not the actually Gremlin, but it's the Pacer, which was even a worse looking car than the Gremlin. But the Ford Mustang 2 also kind of made the list of the gross cars, as well as the Gremlin and the Maverick and the Chevrolet Vega. So there's your top five suspects. But the one that is specifically mentioned is the Ford Pinto. So it takes the top billing as one of the worst killers released on the market. The poorly designed and positioned gas tank exploded on impact, resulting in scores of deaths and maimings. Rear-end collisions resulted in the doors crumpling and jamming, trapping occupants inside and unable to extricate themselves from a fire. The Mercury Capri did not do much better. So Ford refused to redesign the problem, opting to settle the lawsuits for a decidedly cheaper way out. Yeah, this is the 1970s for you. Go ahead and sue me because I think that's less expensive than pulling the car because we're selling so many of them. Uh, John Deere's kind of doing the same thing with their engines and their tier 3 interim engines on their tractors. They crater at about 4,000 hours, and that's out of warranty. And then you're stuck paying 32 grand to get a new engine for your damn tractor. When they probably should have been recalled. So the lawsuits were cheaper than, or but it was cheaper just to. Well, I don't know what they're going to do, but anyway, Grimshaw versus Ford Company is the lawsuit that's most widely cited when it comes to the Pinto. It was decided in Orange County, California, based upon an accident that occurred on a highway in California. In a 1972 Pinto rear-end impact and fire in Orange County resulted in the death of the driver, Lily Gray. Well, they found another Gray. Maybe that was your Gray ghost. And severe injury to passenger Richard. Oh, so we have Richard Teague, and now we have Richard Grimshaw. That's convenient. Gray's family and Grimshaw filed separate suits against Ford, but the actions were consolidated in one trial. The jury awarded $127.8 million in damages and $125 million in punitive damages, and $2,800,000 in compensatory damages. So the jury awarded the largest. This was the largest settlement against an automaker until a $150 million verdict in a 1996 case. Well, that one hadn't came around yet. So that's probably your history of the freeway and the Pinto hatchback. So the actual accident, a Pinto hatchback stalled on a freeway, erupting into flames when it was rear-ended by a Ford Galaxy. Uh, Proceeding in the same direction, Lily Gray, the driver, well, I already Grimshaw, Richard Grimshaw was only 13 at the time. He suffered severe, permanently disfiguring burns to his entire body, uh, and he had to undergo numerous skin grafts and extensive surgeries, but still lost portions of his fingers on his left hand and his left ear in the accident. Oh, which one of those images has the ear missing? Oh, by the way, I found the other day when I was looking back at one of the images, I found the Goodyear Rubber Company boot uh, logo in one of the images. Uh, so Lee Iacocca got his nuts roasted over this incident. But the other parties that mainly sued was the whole state of Indiana actually sued Ford Ford over this car as well. So not just the one uh, lawsuit. There was others. Um, The Pinto's design position its fuel tank between the live rear axle and the rear bumper. You know, it's amazing other subcompact cars did not have the same problem. Belgian-French engineer Etienne Lenoir is generally credited with the invention of the spark plug in 1860, due to its early use in the Lenoir gas engine. Well, I'm not sure what that has to do with the price of tea in China or coffee in the United States, but in reading about these spark plugs, since there is a spark plug here in this image, and these guys are kind of trying to prop the spark plug up, I think that's. I'm going to maybe talk about the Wankel engine a little bit here in a minute, but I want to talk about the use of mica and the manufacture of the spark plug. So there's a verse that says mica in it. And one of the key requirements to making a spark plug is to have a very hard ceramic material with high dielectric strength in order to uh, carry the charge. And so mica was basically uh, used at one time as part of the manufacture of the spark plug. One of the earlier manufacturers was Firestone. It was incorporated in Hamilton, Ontario in 1918. So there's one of the first people to get into the spark plug business. The Alfred Matthew Hubbard was a early prominent user and proponent of the use of LSD in the 1950s. He was reputed to have been the Johnny Appleseed of LSD. Well, you might wonder why I'm talking about Johnny Appleseed. I wonder why Steve Jobs and Apple was chosen as the guy to feature in the article about the computer. Why did they choose him to feature as opposed to featuring, oh, I don't know, Bill Gates? Instead, we used Johnny Appleseed, or the Apple guy, in that article. Well, there's a reason why, because when you look into the spark plug, you'll realize that uh, Mr. Alfred Matthew Hubbard uh, received a patent for a radioactive internal combustion engine spark plug device. And so, since he had this connection to the deal, confident that the Al Hubbard invited Dr. Humphrey Osmond to join him with lunch at the Vancouver Yacht Club. Marie Osmond used to perform, or is a Mormon. The Osmond and his colleagues were using the drug as well as similar substance mescaline. And the high times, by the time Timothy Leary and his colleagues were experimenting with psychedelic drugs in the psychology department of Harvard, in the earlier 1960s, Hubbard had attained a supply of Xandos LSD. Hubbard went there to meet Leary and wanted to swap some LSD for some psychedicillin. The synthesized constituent shrooms. Uh, the CIA grew out of the post-war OSS under the auspices of the MK Ultra. The CIA regularly dosed its agents and with powerful hallucinogenics as a preemptive measure against what was alleged to be done by the Soviet Unions in the Soviets' chemical labs, sometimes with disastrous results. Yeah, yeah. Our government was pre-treating our CIA agents for what they might get given to them by the Soviets. Oh my. All right. Oh, I've had so basically the idea here is that that's another Hubbard. If you like Dianetics, L. Ron Hubbard. If you like LSD, Thomas Leary. If you like the spark plug, there you go. And he's a what is he? Was he an Arthur? What was this guy? He wasn't an Arthur. He was a he was an Alfred Matthew Hubbard. He wasn't an Arthur. Oh no, he was. He was a Johnny Appleseed. You realize that Apple. You remember? Apple. The Apple word Apple comes from the Arthurian time, and the word Apple is a derivative of the word Avon. So anytime they mention in the book Apple, maybe they're just telling maybe you just need to go to Avon, somewhere Avon. And I'll tell you where that is here pretty soon. So Albert Champion was a French track bicycle racer and later an industrialist who won the 1899 Paris-Roubaix. And he famously made Champion spark plugs. All right. So Alfred Champion Company was in Boston, and it made porcelain spark plugs with his name on them. 3 years later, he founded the Champion Ignition Company in Flint, Michigan. So here's a guy that goes Boston and then ends up in Michigan. But here's something interesting. Champion was a racing cyclist at the end of the 19th century. His win in Paris came as a surprise because he had been known as a velodrome rider. After Champion won Paris, he received a contract from a bicycle manufacturer, Schwinn. No, it wasn't Schwinn from Chicago. It was a bicycle manufacturer in Boston to race in the America for the 1900 season. The offer coincided with Champions receiving orders to report for compulsory conscription, which could have meant up to 7 years in the Army. All right, so anyway, so Champion, I don't know how he got out of going to this, but somehow on 12 July 1903, Champion piloted his 300-pound French motorcycle around an outdoor board track in Cambridge, Massachusetts, on what is now the MIT campus. He drove a mile in 58.8 seconds, a world record on a motorcycle on an elliptical track. He crashed driving a Packard Gray Wolf. Okay, so unfortunately, this one lady was named Gray, and he was driving a Packard Gray Wolf in a race in October of 1903, and snapped his femur in a compound fracture. He spent months in a New York hospital, finally leaving with one leg 2 inches shorter than the other. He hobbled out of the hospital on crutches, and during his recovery made up his mind to enter the new auto industry instead of racing bikes. Coping with his short leg by using cranks of different lengths. He won the British. Oh, he didn't quit. He won the Grand Prix of Paris 50-kilometer motor race on the Buffalo Velodrome, and then the 100 kilometer. Oh, he was on a Buffalo. He was on a Buffalo. Oh my God. Oh my God, he was at the Buffalo Velodrome. Oh my gosh. Anyway, all right. Well, okay, so he beat the specialists such as defending national champion Henri Continent and the blonde Adonis. His name was Emile Bours. The race opened the injury. The race opened the injury to his leg, and he was taken to the hospital, where he was operated on to remove several bone chips. Ooh. Okay, so Albert Champion gives us so much information to use. We're again talking about crippling injuries, people with shorter legs, people that might have a limp, People who perhaps might have been born with one foot shorter than the other, somebody that might have had a club foot. Fleming. Oh, we're talking about Fleming. All right, so now I'm just telling you who these stories are about, so that you realize that when they tell you champion and you read about the person, they're trying to get you to a different person who has the same malady as the person they're talking about. So he married his sweetheart in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Uh, Champion had numerous affairs over his marriage of almost 20 years, and his wife sued him for, quote, extreme cruelty. In 1922, he married a younger woman from Kansas City. Kansas City, Kansas City, here I come. In 1927, Charles Lindbergh flew solo on the Spirit of St. Louis across the Atlantic, powered by spark plugs made by the Champion Plugworks Company in Flint. 5 months later, Champion collapsed and died at age 29 in his suite at the Hotel Meurice after being punched by his wife's married lover. Champion left his widow $15 million. General Motors bought Champion's AC spark plug company by acquiring shares held by his estate. Alfred P. Sloan, president of General Motors, said, the keynote of Champion's success was that he was never satisfied. His mind was open to the necessity for constant improvement. What a guy, Mr. Champion. Was another guy that had many accidents and died early, connected to just that tiny spark plug in the corner of this image. So, Kenelm, Kenelm, Lee Guinness. I love it when we find a Lee. Lees are always good. And we found another Edward, too. Edward and a Lee. I mean, this Edward stuff may end up being Edwards Air Force Base, honestly, in California. Because we have all this crap in California, but none of it seems to make any sense. Or who knows? But Kenelm Edward Lee Guinness was a racing driver in the teens and 20s, mostly associated with the Sunbeam racing cars. He set a new land speed record in 1922. He was also an automotive engineer. He invented and manufactured the KLG spark plug. Now, the KLG spark plug was one that basically used the mica, the first one to pioneer the use of mica in these plugs. He was a member of the famous Guinness brewing family. Okay, so he's a member of a brewing family from Guinness. I'm telling you, once you get to the back of the book, the artists, the authors, and the people are getting tired of this damn thing, just like I am. And they started making it easier for you to figure things out. So now you're talking about the first story in the spark plug set of stories about a guy who probably had a limp, and who had connectivity to St. Louis. And now we're talking about the Guinness brewing family in the same article. And so then it's not so hard to put together the limp brewery with the guy that's having a limp. And anyway, so that, and then in the story before, we're talking about the green guy, and the green guy is basically the limp child who never got out of the attic. I just wish they would have spent more time on these later stories, because they're just giving up the ghost. Honestly, they're giving it up. Okay, so so his experience in the 1912 Manx, tourist trophy led him to develop a more reliable spark plug. The innovation of the KLG spark plug, with its use of mica as an insulator. This mica was stacked in sheets and compressed by the center electrode being tightened on the thread. These insulators gave more reliable performance than the porcelain ceramics used by others. Hence, in 1912, Guinness acquired and disused the bald-faced Stag Inn at Putney Vale. Okay, the production of these plugs began Malcolm with Sir Malcolm Campbell using his vehicle called Bluebird. Okay, So then Robin Hood Engineering Works. Well, we talked about Robin Hood in the previous article, and that was about, the, what was it, the plowman or the plowshare guy. So at the outbreak of World War II, Guinness joined the Royal Navy. In the Navy. I always like it when I find someone who's in the Navy. And so they developed some reliability in the use in the aircrafts in the military. KLG's reliability was particularly attractive to land speed record contenders and their many-cylinder engines. He invented the hydropulsar for the treatment of gums by water jet massage. Well, they mentioned a guy in the article previously that lost his teeth. And now we're talking about a guy that invented a hydropulsar that would have helped clean his teeth. Oh, no, that would treat those gums. Land speed record. Okay, so this guy was also involved in yachting. He purchased a surplus minesweeper, the Samuel Green. The Green Giant, the Jolly Green Giant. Okay, so he had, what happened? So in May of 22, Guinness used the car to set a land speed record. So he had an accident in 1924, and he withdrew from record breaking as well as track competition. However, when the Sunbeam co-driver Seagrave took the 1,000 horsepower car to Daytona, Guinness accompanied him. Well, where's this? Okay, so he had a crash in 1924. He suffered some head and other injuries. These other injuries may have been enough to end his racing career on their own, but the head injuries and the trauma of Barrett's death also changed him personally. In his final months toward 1937, he was described as suffering delusions and was admitted to a nursing home. On April 10, 1937, he was found dead in a bedroom at his home near the KLG factory, having apparently gassed himself. Okay. And again, this guy is a member of the famous Guinness family. And if you go actually to the Lemp family and see how many people in that family committed suicide, you'll see why I say that these are the linkages that we're looking for and have been found. So the AC Delco spark plug just gets you to the General Motors Company. We talked about them before. By the way, the Chevrolet is named after Louis Joseph Chevrolet. Yeah, did y'all know that? Did y'all know that the Chevrolet brand is actually named after Louis Joseph? Remember we were looking at those Doc Joes earlier, those Joes that were dock workers? Anyway. Richard Petty. This will be the second of the Richards that we're going to talk about. Because Richard Lee Petty, we always like it when we find a Lee, whether it be Lee Harvey Oswald or Lee Petty. And he's named Richard, which is Nixon's name, Tricky Dick. So he was nicknamed the King. And you cannot ever disassociate the letters STP and a race car and Richard Petty. Because for decades, a Petty family member drove a certain colored car with certain colored colors sponsored by a certain company. And I think the sponsorship of the STP Richard Petty cars was one of the longest running sponsorship deals in modern day sports. Richard Petty his father was also a racer, but he was born in Rambleman, North Carolina. So actually, he was born in Level Cross. His museum is in Rambleman, North Carolina. His father again was Lee Petty, who won the first Daytona. Oh, Daytona, Florida. I haven't thought about Daytona Beach yet as a possible Florida location. Wow, maybe it's Daytona. Okay, well, anyway, level cross, all this, petty family, uh, racing, level cross, level cross. Another mention of a holy symbol, crosses. Okay, so now we're getting to the last part of the story where we're talking about the cars that are specifically mentioned, and one of them is the Morgan. That's the car that has the big M and the small organ, and it was founded in 1910 by Henry Frederick Stanley Morgan. I don't think this is the same investment firm, Stanley Morgan. I think this is totally different. But Morgan quit the Great Western Railroad in 1904 and co-founded a motor company for sales and service and leasing in Malvern Link. Um, I don't. There's really not a whole lot I can get out of the Morgan thing because it was German. Uh, he had some three-wheeled cars, if you will, three-wheelers. So he was kind of making three-wheeled cars. I don't know, trikes, if you will, but I mean they were really cars. They just kind of had an odd design to them. So I don't know what the exact uh, reference to the Morgan company is, but we do know that Morgan Le Fay, uh, alternatively known as Morgan or Morgana or Morg or Morgan or Morg, among other names and spellings, is a Welsh, a Cornish, uh, and ambitious and from the legend of King Arthur. Okay, so remember, I talked about apples, and I talked about the fact that we were talking about Arthur, a Dick Arthur Teague, and another Arthur, and I told you to keep track of the Arthurs. And here's another Arthur. Now, Morgan, in association with the Isle of Apples, which is the Isle of Avalon, if you will. So here's Morgan. Morgan is associated with the Isle of Apples or Avalon, to which Arthur was carried after having been fatally wounded at the Battle of Camlin. Uh, so the idea is merely that if you look up Morgan Le Fay, you'll find out that it has to do with apples. And you had Steve Jobs, that was basically the Apple guy, in the section when we talked about the computer sciences. And so they again mentioned Jobs and an apple. And then we have the Job Goblins. And the reason I mention this is because I have a solve idea that I think is utilizing Catalina Island and the final solve location being Avalon. And Avalon is this hotel, this famous hotel that overlooks the area. And if you take the language in the verse that I match with that image, which is the one-to-one match, you get the something by day, something by night. The stars by day, and all the stars used to go to Catalina Island, and you get the ships by night. And the only time that the star by the name of Robert Wagner likes to take his boat out is at night, and when you can't see him out on the water. Okay, so that's the two Arthurs in line with each other. Um, the Ferrari. This is, I think, the mention in the back of the book of the central. These are the crippled horses from the central European area. Ferrari's name badge, the yellow background, horse on the front, obviously is probably who they're talking about, is Ferrari. And so Enzo Ferrari was not initially interested in the area of producing road cars when he formed Ferrari in 29. Instead, the Ferrari literally means Ferrari stable. That's the word Scuderia. Uh, and so anyway, he was wanting to, I think, race cars. And so he developed all these cars for racing, etc. Um, everybody kind of wanted a Ferrari in 1980. And if you didn't want a Ferrari, you wanted a Lamborghini. And certainly the bull of the Lamborghini could certainly cause some damage as well. But again, these are both fancy, fast, race cars, and the theme of this seems to be uh, the race cars. Um, the other car mentioned is the Volkswagen, which is the German creation. The interesting about the Volkswagen, if you talk about it following the Job Goblin, you must realize that the Volkswagen was made by prison labor in Germany under the Nazi Party. So how this worked is founded in 1937 by the German Labor Front under the Nazi Party, um, and that was a labor organization which replaced the various independent trade unions in Germany during Adolf Hitler. So, when Hitler came to power, first thing he did was said, "Unions, here's my middle finger. Go away. We're going to form an organization called the German Labor Front, and they are going to be responsible for finding you work. And your work, by the way, is going to be to make Volkswagens. Well, actually, you're going to make something that's going to blow things up." Uh, and then, and so, well, they first started making these people cars, if you will, and then they later uh, went into making these cheaper cars. And in '34, many of the projects they were working on got abandoned, obviously, because they wanted to make a basic vehicle to transport two people, or a people's car. Uh, we've all seen the Volkswagen image that was in National Lampoon's magazine, lampooning the Chappaquiddick incident of Kennedy. And so maybe they're just trying to take us back to Chappaquiddick on this. But in 1939 to 44, I'm finally getting to the Type 82 bucket car, utility vehicles, the wartime model, and the amphibious Schwimmwagen is actually what they called it. So, paddy wagon, Schwimmwagen, uh, don't make this up. So in 1945, a heavily bombed factory were captured in the U.S. Armed Forces and subsequent handed over to the British within whose occupation zone the town of factory. So they discovered it. Well, anyway, they converted over to civilian production eventually. So the Volvo would be the Swedish version of this whole automobile manufacturing idea. Uh, I'm sure this was some good Swedish people. Uh, the Volvo logo doesn't actually involve any head badge of anything. It just is VOLVO. So there's not anything good there. So the last thing mentioned in here is the speed bump. Well, some people probably think, oh, the mention of a speed bump, that's probably just an innocuous mentioning of something. So on June 7th, 1906, the New York Times reported uh, on an early implement which planned to raise its crosswalks 5 inches above the road level. The scheme of stopping automobiles has been discussed by different municipalities, but Chatham is the first place to put it in practice. The average automobile top speed at the time was around 20 or 30 miles an hour, but braking was poor. Oh, that California Calci bus! If the operator would have only known that that light on the dash was for the air pressure. Anyway, so Arthur, here's your third Arthur in this article. The third Arthur, and he's a Holly Compton, so he's a carburetor guy. You might need that for to move. So he was a physicist and winner of the Nobel Prize of Physics in 1927 for discoveries resulting in a major change in electromagnetic theory. He's commonly known for his work, Compton effect. Maybe we just need to go to Compton and look for the treasure, or the cask. Would good old Byron had the nut sack to go put something in Compton in 19 in 1982? And he also worked with X-rays. Well, maybe this is the Malcolm X or the X guy, Joe X. His name's not Joe, so he can't be Joe X. All right. Well, anyway, he also invented what he called traffic control bumps, the basic design for the speed hump in 1953. Compton began designs on a speed bump after noticing the speed at which motors passed Brookings Hall at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri, where he was the chancellor. So again, just the innocuous mentioning of a speed bump in a story, back to St. Louis. And this is how they did this book. This is how all the chapters work. It's how all of the ideas come about. They spend a little time talking about Mormons. Then they get tired of talking about Mormons. Then they go start talking about, the automotive industry in Detroit and cars and inventions and things that had to do with the STP oil company, things that had to do with Arthur and Arthur and Arthur and Apple and Apple and Apple. And then finally they give you the story where you get the Old English reference to what an apple is, and you find out it's, Avalon is the old word for apple. And, it just becomes a task of using the puzzle where you're looking for the Greek words and basically turning Old English into New English and figuring out that when they're talking about Avalon. And that if you just put all the pieces together to the puzzle that you think is on the West Coast, and you realize that, well, the first chapter is written in water. Yeah, because it's an island. It's in a whole, and Natalie Wood is in water, and the background image is all wood, dead wood, and petrified wood. And so you put an image figure that's got some bumps and bruises on the face. So you got the face of that image with some bumps on it. If you look carefully at her arms, her wrist area is red and rosy and brown in appearance. And if you actually had the painting of you would probably see these things, and you would have said, well, why has the image figure got these bumps or bruises on it and the red appearance on her face? Well, it's because she got thrown off the back of a boat, buffeted by the coast of Catalina Island. Well, I guess she didn't actually make it to the coast, but anyway. So, all right, what else did I see? So over here in the image, you obviously have, okay, so just in wrapping this up, the story again is about tanks. The story is about tanks. It's about exploding tanks. It's about tanks that exploded. And then it's about Europe. And it's about Europe where tanks exploded. And then if you add the European influence in this article and where tanks were exploding in Europe, it puts you on the battlefield with George S. Patton. Exploding tanks. This so in this image, the street lamp is really disturbing to me, because the street lamp, is making me think, oh, does this have something to do with the car that was parked by Valente, around Bath Beach? Because there's a famous picture of, and he was basically blinded, and the other person in the car was killed when Son of Sam attacked that location. And so, are we trying to bring you back to the Bath Beach park? So there's two lights in this image, and so you got the street lamp, and then you've got the side marker lights. Side marker lights can be seen as an successor to cow lights used on vehicles during the 20s and 30s, which were a pair of lights invented. Early road vehicles used field lamps for lighting and illumination. Silent film star Florence Lawrence is often credited with designing the first auto signaling arm, a predecessor to the modern turn signal. So I think maybe the turn signal or the side marker light in this car, because they could have chosen to not put a side marker light on this car, because if you actually look at the AMC Gremlin, there was only 1 year in which they did not have the side marker light as a component part of the front headlight. And so They moved the side marker light to actually being part of the assembly for the headlight in many vehicles. And so I think the location and the use of the side marker light gives us this information. And if Lawrence Seaway, you've got Flo Lawrence, Florence Annie Bridgewood. Oh God, I just found the Bridgewood. No, I hate when I find a deadwood. Oh, Bridgewood. What's Bridgewood going to tell me? I finally found my Wood to give me some Natalie Wood in this story. Oh, so she was a Canadian American stage performer and film actress. She's often referred to as the first movie star. Who knew Florence Lawrence was considered the first movie star and was long thought to be the first film actor to be named publicly, until evidence published in 2019 indicated that the first named film star was French actor Max Linder. At the height of her fame in the 1910s, she was known as the Biograph Girl for her work uh, for the Biograph Company. So, Biograph Girl is a phrase associated with Florence Lawrence and Mary Pickford, who made black and white silent films with the Biograph Company. At the time, all studios refused to give actors on-screen film credit. They did not want them to gain public celebrity status. Well, that was probably pretty smart of them. Biograph Company itself was known as American Mutoscope and Biography Company, was a motion picture company active in 1895 until 1916. The company was started by William Kennedy Dixon. Oh, God. We found a William Kennedy Dixon. We found a Kennedy, an inventor at Thomas Edison's laboratory. Well, we've already talked about Thomas Edison, right? And in his connection to this, Dixon left Edison in 1895, joining inventors Herman Castor, Henry Marvin, and businessman Elias Koopman. And they started the American Mutoscope Company in New Jersey. I'm actually starting to feel as if there is actually the cask, if there wasn't one in the Kansas City, or not Kansas City, in the New York area, is in New Jersey. Although I have this longing suspicion and feeling that when they mention New Jersey, they're just trying to point out that, look at the Jersey in the book. He's got a New Jersey, and his name is McMahon. And that all these references to New Jersey is just to place you and your eyeballs on the guy wearing the New Jersey. Because the jersey that the guy is sitting at the desk is wearing a New Jersey, not his old jersey, which was the one that he was wearing in at BYU. I don't know. The American Mutoscope Company's film format was 9 layers of film, 8 millimeters apart by 2 inches wide. Actually, I just made that up. Okay, such as the one at the Empire State Express, is one of the named passenger trains and one-time flagship of the New York Central and Hudson River Railroad. It ran between New York and Buffalo in 7 hours. So one of the train names was the Empire State Express in New York at the time. The first studio was located at the roof of 841 Broadway at 13th Street in Manhattan, known then as the Hackett Carhart Building and today as the Roosevelt Building. It was similar to Thomas Edison's setup, Black Maria in West Orange, New Jersey. Well, we're running into some more oranges. So this then leads you to. So you can go on a fantastic voyage right there by just looking up the side marker lamp. So let's see where the street lamp was invented. Oh yeah, I remember looking this up one time. So when was the first street light? When was the street light first introduced? The first public street lighting was with gas. Uh, it was distributed. It was demonstrated at the Pall Mall in London in 1807 by Frederick Windsor. A lamppost came as the relief to the local canine world. Well, I don't know. I guess maybe dogs knocking over these things. Uh, During the 18th and 19th century, nights were painfully dim place. Apparently, the original lighting in London was so poor that James Boswell was able to have sex with a prostitute on Westminster Bridge, and nobody noticed it. Well, so since he was able to do that, I don't know. That's a weird article there. Street light. I'm gonna look it up in Wikipedia. So it's a pre-industrial area. Sir Henry Barton, mayor of London, King Louis the XIV authorized sweeping reforms, which included the installation and maintenance of lights on streets at intersections. Gas lamp lighting dates back to Stephen Hales, was the first person who procured a flammable fluid liquid one. Uh, but that one's got a bulb in it, so let's look at the arc lamps. Uh, Again, that goes back to London. Incandescent bulbs. Looks like what we have. So the first incandescent bulbs were in Chesterfield in England. 12 electric lights around a public square road system on 29 April 1879 in Wabash, Indiana. Oh, the first city in the United States to successfully demonstrate electric lighting was Cleveland, Ohio, with 12 electric lights around the public square. And then the next was Wabash, Indiana, which lit 4 brush arc lamps with 3,000 candle power each, suspended over their courthouse, making the town square as light as midday. Then Kimberley, Cape Colony, in South Africa, uh, was the first place in the southern hemisphere. In Central America, San Jose and Costa Rica. Okay, I'm not going to read you the full history of the street lamp, but you may note that there's a street lamp in this image, and it takes you back to Cleveland as being the first place in which the street lamp was used, and the first place that the traffic signal, which was in a previous article, the first place that it was installed and used was Salt Lake City. Seems to be a pattern developing here between things featured in the images and where they originated, or where they were first manufactured or first used or something. Uh, you just have to figure out what the pattern is. And so that's my information on the street lamp. Okay, folks, let's see if anybody joined in today. Well, nobody's joined in for this great presentation, so I'm going to close up the shop. I was trying to keep it under an hour, but I could not because I discovered new information as I was looking. And I didn't look up the modern tool bag to see who invented the modern tool bag because it looks like the guy's looking up at the car, and he's got the modern tool bag. See who invented that. Well, he invented the tool bag. Roger reinvented it. Yeah, well, that's after the thing came out. So, well, I don't know. The toolbox was um, yeah, I don't know. But portable chest for carrying tools. Doesn't really say when it was invented. Okay, folks, that's going to do it for this episode. Hope you enjoyed the show. I'll be back, or I won't, depending upon how my car goes. So, I had a car in high school, and I always wanted people to make a mention of it, and so I painted a big S on it, and everybody would say, "Look at that S car go." It didn't go very fast though; it was kind of slow.